Questioning the past and you're wondering why. Time to check out History High.
Welcome to History High. This podcast is aimed at A-level history students, but if you're studying Russia at GCSE, lots of this video should be relevant to you as well. In this video, we're going to look at the background to the Russian Revolution, the kind of state that Lenin set up afterwards, and his early decisions, such as the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly. This is a lot to get through, so at points in the video you might want to pause and make notes at your own pace. At the start of 1917, Russia was ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, an autocratic leader who had been losing authority for some time. In February 1917, after mass protests, the Tsar was forced to resign. From February to October, Russia was ruled by a so-called provisional government, but this government didn't address the grievances that many workers and peasants in Russia had. As 1917 went on, ordinary Russians were drawn more and more towards Lenin's party, the Bolsheviks, and their simple but very effective slogan, peace, bread and land. Eventually, in October 1917, the Bolsheviks took power in the name of the Soviets. The Soviets were small democratic councils that had emerged spontaneously across every village and town in Russia. The Soviets were a form of direct democracy, and Soviet representatives were immediately recallable. This means that if your representative did something you didn't like, you could call a meeting and you could elect someone new, rather than having to wait 4 years, as you have to do under capitalist democracies like the one that we live in Britain. Now, while I think what happened in October was a popular revolution, some historians argue it was a coup, a violent seizure of power by a minority. At the end of this video, I'll suggest some readings on this topic. Some historians also argue that after 1917, Russia became increasingly authoritarian, bureaucratic, and centralised. You can remember this as A, B, C. Again, I think there are certainly elements of this, but I don't think it's as deterministic as some historians would have us believe. We will come back to this ABC idea in other videos. So, in October 1917, the Bolsheviks took power in the name of the Soviets, and the Soviets sent representatives to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets. Lots of key words here you need to make sure you know. The All-Russian Congress of Soviets was too big to meet regularly, like a kind of parliament. So instead they elected what was known as Sovnarkom, which ran Russia on a day-to-day basis. So, what was Sovnarkom, and did it signify a move towards Lenin centralising control? Well, it was essentially the new Russian cabinet. It was made up of 13 People's Commissars, as they were known. Lenin was elected the chair of Sovnarkom, and other commissars included Leon Trotsky, who was head of foreign affairs, and Joseph Stalin, in charge of nationality affairs. All of the new commissars were Bolsheviks, and most, but not all, had supported Lenin since 1903. However, Sovnarkom itself was accountable to the Congress of Soviets, which contained representatives from other parties, such as the Mensheviks and Socialist Revolutionaries. One part of the SRs, the left SRs, supported the new government, and some had junior roles in the new government as well. So at this early stage, Russia was not yet a one-party state. More evidence of the genuinely democratic nature of Russia at this point is the fact that Lenin passed a number of decrees that were really popular. The Decree on Land, the Decree of Peace, Workers' Decrees, and the Decree of Workers' Control. These early decrees allowed Lenin to gain control over Russia in two ways. Firstly, they were genuinely popular, which meant that the Bolsheviks gained legitimacy. Secondly, ending the war gave Lenin breathing space to try to solve some of the economic and political problems Russia had. In January 1918, however, there was a key turning point. After the October uprising, elections were held to a new nationwide Constituent Assembly. But the Bolshevik-led Soviet government got rid of it in January 1918, something that's held up by historians as evidence that Lenin was moving towards authoritarianism. Before October, the demand for a constituent assembly was about creating a more democratic alternative to the provisional government. which was unelected. But after October, the provisional government had gone, so demanding a constituent assembly became a symbol for many people who opposed the Bolsheviks. Places at the centre of the revolution, cities, the navy, and parts of the army, voted overwhelmingly for the Bolsheviks. But most of Russia's population was in the countryside, where the level of struggle was much lower. So the peasant-oriented socialist revolutionaries, the SRs, won 380 seats in the Constituent Assembly. The Bolsheviks won 168. The SRs had split down the middle, however, and these results didn't reflect this. One side, the left SRs, which were the most popular, supported the revolution and joined the Bolsheviks in a new coalition government. And yet the right SRs dominated the party's candidate lists and used the Constituent Assembly to refuse to endorse Soviet rule. And so, in January 1918, Lenin scrapped the Constituent Assembly for good. 2 months later, in March 1918, Lenin approved the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which ended Russia's involvement in World War I by giving away huge areas of Russian land. You should be able to see the consequences of this treaty on the screen now. The treaty was quite unpopular, and the Bolsheviks lost elections across Russia in April and May 1918. Lenin demanded new elections, but these elections were postponed with the outbreak of the event that would devastate Russia for years to come: the Russian Civil War. So, to summarise, Tsar Nicholas II, who had ruled Russia for 30 years, was overthrown in February 1917. He was replaced by the Provisional Government, which was meant to organise elections, but delayed and kept Russia in World War I. The Bolsheviks eventually took power in the October Revolution, after which they passed several popular decrees. The new government was the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which elected the Sovnarkom, the Russian cabinet. The other socialist parties, Mensheviks and right SRs, walked out of the government in protest, so this new government was mainly Bolsheviks. In January 1918, Lenin dissolved the Constituent Assembly, which was meant to be the new parliament. He argued it was no longer the most democratic body in Russia, but many historians argue this was an authoritarian move. You should also now be able to talk about and define the key words we gave at the start of the video. Look back to these and check you can. To read more on this fascinating topic, check out some of the books on the screen. My big recommendation is the incredible book which came out last year, October by China Mieville, which gives a real sense of the hopes and dreams of ordinary people throughout this period. Dreams which were crushed with the counter-revolution by Stalin in the 1920s. That's the subject of another video. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to History High. Thanks for listening.
Crashing the past and your